You'll see that there are fact sheets on what's happening with accreditation. I urge you to pick those up because there's a lot of new information in there that will just help you see where we're going in the development of those guidelines. And the driver safety framework's been in there for a while. So yes, we're going to support what we call efficiency partnerships. Now there's a non-plain English term. What that just means is if you can get together and end up spending more money on services and less money on admin, we're going to back you. We're going to centralise some core services and products. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to try and make it easier for you to buy vehicles and buy the right vehicles. We're working with the CTO to try and work out whether we can make insurance, training, a whole lot of things a lot simpler that you can get through one place. Aboriginal funeral transport's been completely rebuilt as we speak so that it becomes much easier, but it's also much better managed. That's one of those issues where we had some people gaming the system and so people missed out and other people got too much, so we're trying to sort that out. And I've talked about the software stuff. Now all of this is ideas. This is stuff that we're starting to do. We'll be in conversation. It's nothing to be scared about. It's something to think about. What do you need out of these things? Make sure your CTO representative knows so they can speak directly to us. Gathering the evidence is going to happen in a couple of ways. So we're already out collecting Aboriginal community unmet needs data because the way we've collected information from those communities before has actually meant that we haven't had any real data. The way we collect it distorted what we got. So we're trying to get one-on-one, person-to-person, engaging with the community information. We'll investigate collaborative consumption where you buy things as a group. So if 100 organisations buy it together, it's probably going to cost you 30 or 40% less. But we'll have to work that through. We're doing a customer value proposition, another funny term for community transport. This is something that in transport we do for every service type. The last type that hasn't been done is community transport. And that's where we actually go and interview a couple of thousand customers of CT and find out not only what do they like, but what they don't like, what do they expect, what do they get, what's most important to them, in what would they weight it as, what's the most important thing if we can't give them everything they want, so that we can work out which things we have to deliver in which order, given that we can't do everything at once. And probably the biggest thing we're doing is reviewing pricing structures, and that is reviewing what it is we buy. Now we've talked about this when we've been out to all the regions, but we're starting to get deep into this now. At the moment we buy a trip, and a trip can be 300 kilometres, it can be 1 kilometre. It doesn't really make much sense when you're buying stuff to not know what you're going to get when you pay your money. So we're going to work very closely with the CTO and with some people who actually understand this stuff deeply about what are measures that are reasonable, that actually reflect your real cost base, so that we can more closely match what we buy to that. I'm hoping that that means that we can actually contract for more services straight up. But we also have to determine what sort of services that we're going to put in what regions, depending on what the customers say is most important to them. So you can see there's all these elements, and I'm doing this because every day I'm trying to juggle which way we're going. But we have a plan. It's laid out over 3 years. That will become available to you quite soon, and you'll be able to see what order we're doing things in. But first we've got to lock in our deal with the CTO, which hopefully will happen after your AGM. So what are the outcomes we want? What we want is a sustainable industry future. We want more quality services with satisfied clients, and we want the sector to be recognised for what it does. Now, don't underestimate what it means to be in the Passenger Transport Act. It was lobbied for a long time as a symbolic gesture, but that's not what it is. It actually means there are a whole new raft of ways of funding services now that were not previously possible. It'll take a few years to run through all the contract models and change the Department of Transport and how it actually funds things. It actually means we can buy different services using different vehicles to any service provider who's accredited. And that means you're recognised as part of the public transport system for the first time. Now if you think where your clients come from, they've used public transport at the beginning of their life, most likely to get to and from school. A lot of them have used it to get to work. What happens at the other end? oh, you're in a special service where we can only ration, you can only get so many services a fortnight. That's not the vision. The vision is we support people through the whole life cycle. They're part of the system that government provides as a core service. So we now have the basis for that. We have a legislative basis, we have a funding basis, we have a contracting basis. Now we've got to actually have a system that delivers on it. That will take some time. But it will mean reform from your end so that you understand what it is so that you can actually bid better. It also means buying the cheapest service you can to deliver against what you're funded for. So if it's cheaper for you to buy a taxi service and take, a 10-cent margin off the top, do that. Now the one thing that I promised to do was explain what full cost recovery means. I'm very trepidatious about this because I reckon if there's 200 people in this room, there's at least 130 different versions of what full cost recovery is. But I'll make it really simple because people worry about it because they think we're going to come after you in a contracted way because you're not getting full cost recovery. So let's talk about the really simple one. Bus services. Okay? If you've got any multi-seat vehicle and you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 HAT clients on it, or CTP clients, I don't care which ones, and you've got a spare seat, the cost that you must recover for that is the additional time and distance of fuel and driver to cater for that person. So if you've got to go 500 metres out of the way, you've got to cover your costs for 500 metres. If you're going to go 100 kilometres and they're a heavy person, it might cost you another $1 in fuel. Okay? So really, if you're getting anywhere between $2 and $5, we'd be quite happy if that being full cost recovery, meeting all your contract conditions on group services. You're not meant to try and get $30.65 because, quite frankly, that doesn't even represent your cost of providing a service. There must be 1 in 10,000 services you provide would cost $30.65. But you're just selling spare capacity. It's just a seat. There's nothing to it. Much harder when you I'm being buzzed now. Stop. Much harder if you're going to provide a one-on-one service, because then the full cost recovery is the full cost of the OPEX, the operating cost of running that service. So the cost of the driver, the cost of the fuel, the increased maintenance that you'll incur on the vehicle for the additional distance. That is much harder. So what we've agreed to do is to work with Warwick from Clarence Community Transport, who has been, innovating for a little while now, and we're going to forensically go through his entire cost base and work out what it costs per kilometre of service. And when we've done that, we'll feed that all back out to you, and that can be a baseline until we've done a much bigger piece of work. And it'll just give you a guideline of what to charge. But don't be confused by this $30.65 thing. It is a misnomer. That's not what your full cost of service is. It might cost you $100 to provide a service. You still only get $30.60 for it. It might cost you $3 to provide a service, and you make 1,000% profit. That's what we've got to sort through. Does anybody have any questions? I'm not a minister. You can ask me questions. I can't actually see people out there. There's a light right in my eyes, so I'll be told if there's a question.
Hi Terry, Helen Battolino. I'm sorry, I just can't help myself. I'm really pleased that you're attempting to define full cost recovery because it's been a big issue which we've raised over and over. But I'm very concerned that you've given people now the impression that it's a marginal cost for the seat, which is what if I understand, it's marginal costing. What about the situation where the marginal cost for the seat is lower than the standard cost that the other clients and passengers on the bus are paying? That's a different message.
Don't get user fees confused with the cost of providing the seat.
No, I'm not getting it confused. I understand the difference between a cost end and the pricing end. Yeah. But the reason for calculating the marginal cost is so that we know how much to charge that extra person.
Yeah, and once we've worked out what it costs, you can charge whatever your current fees policy is, because you want equity amongst people using your services. The The issue that I get through my inbox at least 4 times a week is from services who've told clients they can't carry them because they've got to charge them at least $30.65 for a seat on a bus. And that is just not true.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's a very, very good message, but perhaps the message to take away is not that we're charging them the marginal cost of the seat, we're charging them a minimum of what the other clients are actually being paid.
And that's a policy for service providers. They set their fees. Now there is a national fees policy coming in, and obviously ACTA and David Denmark have been working on that, and we've been arguing tooth and nail about what that should be, so that you can actually work out what your income might be over a year from fees. But that's a long way off.
If you don't mind, there's also a question that I've been grappling with. How does your work at the state level, which you've talked about in your fact sheet, which is great, on costing and pricing, fit in with the work that's being done by ACTA? And thinking down the track, if a standard fees policy is brought in for the CHSP, how does that fit with the requirements under the Passenger Transport Act of setting a standard fare, which I understand community transport still shouldn't be doing?
Not yet, because the regs aren't in place, but yeah, once everybody's accredited, if you want to charge a fee, you charge a fee. As long as you're not running a passenger transport service that starts at a fixed origin, ends at a fixed destination and goes by a timetabled route. Because that is a public transport fare. What you're doing is actually providing a charter, and you can set any fee you like for that under the Act. The pricing stuff we're doing is about working out what it costs you to provide a service. That way we can work out what we have to pay you to provide a service. Whatever the fees policy is over the top, we might then make a unilateral decision to go, okay, well, but it costs you $3.80 to provide that service and you're going to get $5 for it. We're not going to give you anything. Or we might go, we'll give you half of it because you're going to make $2.50 and that you can reinvest in more services. We haven't got to that point yet. There is no public transport service, sorry, there's one STA area, but no other public transport services in the entire network that actually recover their costs through the fare box or get anywhere near. It's usually around 32 to 35% cost recovery. So I don't think we're going to get to that point. But we need to understand what we're buying and how much it's costing us, because otherwise how can I predict what I'm going to buy next year and the following year and the following year? At the moment it's just a guess. It's not good enough.
One more question, if anybody's got it. There you go.
Oh, hello, I recognise you.
Stephen from Coast and Country Community Services. Thank you, Terry. There's a lot of good information you've given us so far, and there is some positives in it. But one of the biggest things that's the backbone of this industry is the volunteers. We don't hear a lot about what we're going to do for our volunteers going forward and how things are going to improve. Well, one of the major issues that has come to our service just recently is volunteer insurance. Now, I'm sure lots of people think that all of their volunteers are fully covered for insurance, but they're definitely not. And we've got lots of different volunteers that volunteer for different reasons. We've recently had an incident at our service where one of our volunteers is $2,500 out of pocket because of a doctor's bills and things like that. So is there an area that insurance can be improved for the community sector for all volunteers, not just within community transport? How do we change this? How do we push this up to the politicians to make that change? Because at the moment the legislation stops insurance companies from insuring the gap. So where do we go from?
Well, that sounds like something that a CTO would do. Seriously, I mean, it's not an issue for government because this is all volunteers. So there's Volunteering New South Wales. I would expect that CTO would talk to Volunteering New South Wales and work out what to do next. I mean, there are huge issues with volunteers, and some of them really scare me, and that's part of working out what the cost base is. I mean, we do take volunteers into account when we're looking at what it costs to provide a service, and on a matrix of pricing, volunteer services, depending on where they are either cheaper or more expensive than paid driver service, and we've got to work that out and make sure everybody understands what the cut-off is. And there's also different rates of reimbursement for volunteers, so we need to understand why people are paying different ways as well. So that's top of our mind. we're well aware of quite a number of insurance issues, including some people who are paying above the ATO rate for reimbursement, which then effectively is a wage, but they haven't covered the driver on the schedule. So there's a whole lot of little wrinklies to work out there. And hopefully that's one of the things Pamela will be talking about in governance, is actually understanding what you're doing and what risks you're taking, and then managing for those risks. Remembering, I'm buying the services from you, I'm expecting you to cover your own risk off. We're not... There was a perception, I think, that somehow we were in a group hug, and our job was to make sure you're all okay. Our job is to make sure the customer gets a great service by buying the right services from you and everybody else. Taxi industry, yourself, private bus industry, disabilities, I don't mind really. Whoever's going to get the greatest value for money and the great quality so that I can deliver it to that customer, in the end that's where the money's going to go. So people, that's why we're going through sort of a 3-year plan. We really want you guys to understand where you're at and what you're doing and how you're doing it, so that it's an even playing field. Because at the moment I think you're a little bit left out of the loop on a whole lot of stuff, and we're going to work really hard to get everybody up so that they can maintain their presence in the industry.
Thank you very much, Terry.